Okay, so up next we have John Bruce, who is in Boston right now. John is the CEO and a co-founder of Inrupt, which is a complement to the MIT open source software project known as Solid. Thanks so much, John. We're looking forward to learning more about Inrupt.
Thank you, and good day to you all. It's a pleasure having the opportunity to speak. I must tell you, I know maybe overrun, but I found the presentations from Pramod and Julian really interesting stuff. So I'll do my best to keep up with the theme here. And let me tell you that what I intended to do is rather than dwell on Solid per se, is to explain to you the philosophy behind Solid and Inrupt, if I may. And I promise you I'll keep it to 15 minutes or less. You know, the notion of, let's first talk about the notion of Solid, which is an open source project that it's been, the genesis was MIT. It's the result of many years of work on RDF, the semantic web, linked data, and the encapsulation of all of those technologies is embodied in Solid. And so Tim invented Solid about 5 years ago now, I guess. And there's been a bunch of work done over years to make it the platform it is today. And the reason it's being built is because the web, as Sir Tim originally envisioned it, we have yet to see. And what Solid represents, and the galvanizing agent of Solid is Inrupt, which is a company that Sir Tim and I founded about 18 months ago. The intent of it is to introduce a mid-course correction to the web. And I think it's right and proper we do so. And I know that a lot of this call today is about privacy and empowerment for the individual on the web. And I think that absolutely that's our intent here. But it's really important to stop just for a moment and consider why we might be able to make that happen. And the way we view it is that the web's composed of three huge constituencies. There's users like all the folks on this phone. And we are very constrained in our options, notwithstanding the implications for privacy. And leaving to the side just for a minute if I can, all the folks who are not on the web. Actually, as you might have noted, we're coming up to the 30th anniversary of the web, and an interesting fact is that just about 50% of the world's population is now considered to be on the web. And we're going to celebrate that with Tim in a couple of weeks. But anyway, back to the essence of what I was trying to say. Philosophically, we believe users like the folks on the phone here are very constrained. We have very limited choice. Our privacy is obviously, that's the essence of this webinar today. Our privacy is very suspect today. But even if that was true and singular and unique to us, there's only so much we can do as users because we have an array of objections against change here. So then one must consider the second big constituency that exists on the web, and that's organizations who want to service us. They want to, you know, sell us products or services, or they're a government agency. They want to deliver social services or whatever it happens to be. But big organizations, and I've traveled the world over to know this. As an aside, I'm also a certified privacy expert. So I've had occasion for many years to talk to folks about privacy. And generally, my conclusion is that the overwhelming majority of companies don't want data. And that might fly in the face of some public themes out there, but generally corporations would rather stick to their core competency of selling you a pair of shoes or whatever it is without being required to look after this, what they consider to be somewhat toxic stuff, which is considered your personal data. If they could work in a way that wouldn't require that, they'd be liberated, they'd be free to do other things. And then the third big constituency that comprises the web are developers, the glue that binds all this together. And developers today are seriously constrained. They're tutored into this mode of having to extract data from users, keep it safe and secure while they manipulate it, and then give you back a single resultant of manipulating that data. And that's hugely myopic. And if, like me, you've got 80 applications on your phone, you'll know that it's very constraining. I actually glue them all together when I consider these different applications and the implications to me as an individual. And a sort of halfway house, if one wants to step over these boundaries of these mini application silos of data, is to construct a scenario where the developer uses APIs to pull data from disparate places, mesh it together in some form or fashion, and give you a better result, and give you a more holistic view of it, you as an individual, give you a more innovative app. So here we have it. Users feel compromised, organizations want to be free of the obligations, and developers would much rather write applications that are not constrained by all of this. And that's what gives us the chance for change. So we believe a huge change is underway, and it's inevitable. And it will all be about data. And that's consistent with what Pramod and Julian have been describing. Data is going to drive pretty much the next evolution of the web. And not just data per se, not just access to the data, but control over the data. So philosophically, our view of what the world looks like is as follows. If you look at the web today, of course it's all centralized. Of course it is. Where the world we're used to living in, it implies that we will give our data to a single entity remotely. And I've picked on some of the usual suspects here, but we will give our data to agencies, and in return for which they'll give us some value back. And what that means, of course, is that we have no real control over our data. And see above notes, outside of this circle, or very modestly more, most organizations don't want this scenario, and developers are constrained by it too. So what Solid describes is a world that's different. It's a world where, and on this chart, on this slide here, you'll see that there are individuals, and that hexagonal shape there, that's a thing called a personal online data store. I will say as an aside, all of this is based on existing web standards. So it's all totally conformant with the web specs as exist today. What we're just trying to do, somebody said to me, you're trying to turn a web upside down. Answer, no, we're not. We're trying to turn it right side up. With a modest adjustment here or there, we can really get back to the web, or we can nudge the web back to the direction it should be on. An aside, back to the slide. So these hexagons represent a thing called a personal online data store. That's where all your data is going to reside. So it won't reside in remote silos. It will be local to you. It will be in your pod. And not just data that you generate, but devices, IoT devices pertinent to you will also infuse your pods. And as a consequence of which, when you've got all your data available to you, then application developers can build apps which assume that they don't need to entice you to give them data, nor do they need to engage with other third parties using APIs to pull data from their silos. It's a world where, because the data is under your control, you can grant access to it, to applications. And as you see here, it's a very simplistic view of it, but it's almost like using a browser. Actually, if you can use a browser, you can use this system. And the applications will render you value, and the value will assume access to a broad scope of your data, but based on the permissions you grant to individuals or apps, they can render it back to you. And the world changes quite significantly as a consequence. And of course, what it's doing here is it's universally inclusive. Aside from for the 50% of the population of the world that's on the web, any of them can use this system. And of course, the work that Sir Tim's doing with the foundation is trying to enable the balance of the world's population, to see what else we can do. More of that in a second when I talk about what Inrupt's doing. This is all user controlled. And of course, users have a different view of control. Some of it they want to keep, simplistic. I mean, while I might have a degree of granularity of interest and control over my data, my supposition is my 85-year-old mother will be less interested in that. So what we're building here is a UI which permissions in an appropriate way based on the individual use case. And it's totally flexible. Because it's based on web standards, now we can operate in a world that isn't constrained by requiring installation of new technologies. It basically says, this is open source. If you're out there and you're a developer and you want to build applications that can work on this system, knock yourself out. Actually, and since we're very, very young, I will tell you, we announced at Inrupt was going to be trying to galvanize this some 5 months ago. And since such time, when it comes to developers, we've had something like 400,000 developers come and spend time looking at the material we provided, and about 70,000 sign up for accounts. And by reckoning today, we think there's certainly more than 2,000 working on the system and helping it evolve and start to build apps. In parallel with which, we're working with major organizations, and these are some of them. So we're working. I will tell you that there's a thing here that means the difference between a modest amount of intriguing success and global adoption, and it's a phenomenon called a network effect, and it says that, you know, if you can induce change across those three constituencies, then you can just about pull it off. You can mobilize millions of people to change, and to kickstart that, we're working with some folks with huge web footprints. Actually, India is a fascinating place, and they're doing some phenomenal work. And we're working with a huge carrier in India to see if we can help galvanize change there. Entirely consistent with what Pramod and Deepa are doing with the Indian stack. At the same time, we have some healthcare, major healthcare providers who are about to go to pilot. On digital identity, we had a successful pilot for refugees around the world, which was led by, I think, the biggest payment card processors there is in the world, and they did it as a project with global interest. This was for refugees to give them an ID and a way to become known as they traverse various geographies. And we just recently, as this weekend, made a submission with, is it public, I think, with MasterCard to do exactly the same for a mission that the World Bank's on, for the 2 billion unbanked folks around the world, which we're very excited about doing. And then telecoms, we have a huge amount of interest, and we're, I think, about to go to proof of concept with a number of them, not just the folks in India, but we believe with folks in Germany and folks out of the UK, to see how we could make these pods available to their constituents and to create applications. We and others would create applications that could leverage the fact that now all the data resides in the control of the user, not remotely in these data silos. And we think we can do things in a really, really innovative way. And of course, that's what's, in our mind, going to drive adoption. For all the concern there is about privacy, I think it's healthy as a concern. I think what's really going to mobilize change is freeing up the value of the data that exists in silos, put it in the hands of individual users, give them innovative apps that they couldn't possibly use today because they don't exist. And as a consequence of which, that will drive adoption. One API, it's totally open source, and I think the time for change is here. So again, we're hopeful we can induce this mid-course correction on the web, and as a consequence of which, help change. I mean, it's entirely consistent with all of the things we all of us understand about GDPR and the various other privacy regs around the world. Wherein the user no longer needs to beg permission from the vendor to give them back their data or to delete their identity and so on. It says you don't no longer need to do that. It's all under your control. So fascinating times. Again, Inrupt is 5 months old. So while Sir Tim and I have been working on this for over a year, and he years before that in terms of technology, the business Inrupt, we announced ourselves 5 months ago, and we've been thrilled with the reception we've been getting. And I see a world where we and what's going on in India with Deepa and Pramod and the Stack group, I see a very complementary world. I have yet to spend much time with the DigiMe folks, so it's great to hear Julian describe his business. But consistently now we've found a complementary way to help everybody in an aligned fashion. Big vendors, technology companies, organizations who want to service people, and developers in their tens of thousands. So I'm quite optimistic, actually, cautiously optimistic. We can induce change here for the better. Give people back privacy, give them value on their data, give them applications they couldn't possibly enjoy today, and to give those 50% of the world's population who don't have an existence on the web, to give them one. That's our mission right there. So anyway, I'm sure we'll come to questions later. So thank you for your time. I hope I was 15 minutes. So thank you for your time.